Go.
You're not going to look
All
at
right,
your notes?
we're live at the Cuddle Couch
You're
at
live
the
from the
DTLT
Cuddle
office.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Jim set us up here on what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so we got at least an exciting show for me today. One of the things we want to talk about is, education has become a market. When it's nothing new. We all know it's a market, but there's been some interesting posts. One that Luke Waltzer linked to the other day. Chris Lehman linked to one about education as the market. And then I was thinking about something Prelinger said while he was on a Democracy Now! Video with Brewster Kahle about corporate expression versus personal expression. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of articles dealing with the kind of state of education as a market and what that might mean for what we do as ed tech.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, guys?
Makes complete sense.
So let's start with the article in Dissent by Mark Nason, who's an African-American professor at Fordham University.
Yeah, this one?
That.
There we go.
Yeah, that's it. And what this article says, and jump in, I know you've all read it, but if I boil it down, it's like we're doing a great disservice by investing in middle-class corporate America with their consultings and all this kind of like technical kind of like theories about how we're going to build the LMS and stuff, and invest in the community. Invest in the people in the community, take that money, stop throwing it at the kind of new media douchebags and all that stuff around it, and start putting it in the people of the community and start building community around schools. Which I really loved about this argument is clear-eyed, and for me, it gets at the idea of, open educational resources are not going to solve our economic problems.
Right.
Throwing money at people will,
Right.
to some degree.
Well, I think it gets at sort of a philosophy that's underpinned DTLT for a number of years, and it's one way in which I think we're different from some other of our other organizations like us at other schools, which is that we believe more in investing money in people than investing money in technology.
Totally.
And we tend to be actually sort of skeptical of big price ticket technology.
Right.
And I know, like, when I attend like national conferences, I always feel like I'm not like everybody else for that reason.
Yeah,
like,
you don't want the $4 million.
And part of it is because we don't have money,
Right.
which is why we're not really enamored with that. But I think we also have a healthy skepticism that what was going to solve anything
Right.
is money or what you can buy with it.
That's
it's
right.
much more about investing in the people who can transform situations.
Well, and it blows my mind, though, because there are a lot of, especially I think in the K through 12 arena, there are a lot of schools that are strapped for money that will still turn around and sit at the hands of a vendor and say, what do you have for me? And just willing to sign, five-figure, things for something that's worthless to them. And it's all, just to make
like
it
the
a sale.
Promethean boards.
Yeah,
and
Right.
exactly. They're like put Promethean boards in all of our schools, and they can easily still be sold on it, even when they're saying, "Well, we can't really invest in technology,
Right.
or we don't have the funding for technology resource teachers."
We're cutting resource teachers and
Right.
literacy teachers and arts
Yeah.
programs, but we need a whiteboard in every classroom because that's the way to.
And those
fix
are the
this.
jobs in that community that are getting cut, and the money is actually being redirected to these middle manager, corporate, privatized things that are taking that money and bringing them out of that community.
Right.
So a lot of the money is flowing completely out of that community. I loved how Nason frames that.
Right.
And without kind of getting into the jargon and all this stuff, it's just a clear-eyed post. And what's great is we actually shared a New York Daily News article. New York Daily News has been doing some kind of investigative journalism around Department of Education and where their millions of dollars are going. And so one of the things that's interesting is the Department of Ed found that there was kind of collusion in their higher ranks where they were throwing money at this kind of TLA organization. I think it was like technology, leadership, whatever. And they were actually doing networking stuff for the Department of Education. Turns out that 15 cents of every dollar they made of their 40 million contract was going to pay developers in Turkey, which were part of an organization or a company that they owned, and the rest of it was going in their pocket. So of the $16,000 they paid developers in Turkey, $122,000 of that was what they charged the Department of Ed. So do the math, right? $100,000 goes in their pocket, and that's a $40 million grant.
And I think a portion of that, too, is just tech literacy from your CIOs and your people on top to understand where the value is in something and whether something's worth the cost of it, right? Because I mean, when you're willing to sign off on something and say, oh yeah, they're really giving us our value, and they're, if a company's able to turn around and get something for 20 cents on the dollar, then you were an idiot for paying, you know, 5 times as much.
There's
for
some corruption there because they never made a deal with the DOE that they would go out of country and they would outsource that. It was never discussed. And they were basically a P.O. box in Florida that actually had this business set up in Turkey that they owned. So it was just basically this idea of offshoring the work, charging millions of dollars for stuff you pay pennies on the dollar for. And this is how the Department of Ed is spending its money. And this is Nason's point, is the idea of all this money is being redirected to make a few people rich, and the communities are falling. We're looking at the wasteland outside the limo that Brian Lamb just blogged about. I mean, it's insane.
And then the other key point that doesn't get focused on necessarily is to what end is all this being spent on vendors and other things? Right. It's to improve test scores. And is that, you know, is that the right direction, the direction that we want to be going in anyway?
Well, there's a way in which once you reduce your goal in education to achieving a certain score on a standardized test, you've opened yourself up for somebody to swoop in and say, like when you know what I'm saying? When you boil it down to something that simplistic as a symbol of excellence, how hard is it to build a tool that can help with that? Right. You know, because you're not dealing with the actual, you know, messy issues of education. It's a whole lot harder to sell somebody a bill of goods when what they're trying to solve is actually a real problem.
And it's easier to set up those schools as iconically failing.
Right.
So you can go in there with solutions and with prescriptions that actually take the money that may have been earmarked for that community and getting it out of it. Right. Because the failing brings in these corporate solutions.
Now this is an interesting balance though. Jason mentioned in the chat that when you go DIY and go with these alternatives, you've got to have someone on hand that has the skill set to maintain them. And what if you just don't have those kind of resources?
Sure. We don't need reform, we need support. You know, we need the community supporting teachers, you know, we need the community supporting the school. You know, teachers should be getting merit pay for acting as the support in so many different ways for a student, as opposed to just improving the test scores.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one person that we were going to have on the interview, and we're hoping to get him probably next week or something, was Curtis here. And you go back to saying we invest in people and not products. And the thing is, it's easy to say we don't have someone on hand that can maintain that. But when you start to look at it, the price tag on some of these things, and you say, what if we spent $20,000 or $30,000 and, you know, we bought a product that didn't quite have all of that, but we also paid someone that stipend to manage it, to learn about it, to figure it all out. I mean, that when you're talking about spending a lot of money, and I know at Longwood, we would spend 6 figures sometimes on certain pieces of software, especially in higher ed, and when you're talking about enterprise environments. And I kept thinking, you know, that's 2 people's salaries, or 3 people, a yearly salary to just work on that. And that's something, you know, it's easy to say for us who are already overworked, well, you know, there's no one on site that can figure that out, but you can pay people to do that kind of thing.
Or you look
and pay them well.
I think the other thing that you start seeing, too, when you start spending that kind of money on product is you see mission follow money. And suddenly it's like you've invested so much money in a solution that now the mission of the institution is to make sure that solution pays off.
That's right.
Which is unbelievable when you think about it from a strategic perspective. Like,
and it's what blows my mind about the awesome stuff that UBC is doing with Brian Lamb and Novak and those folks. Like, they're building a complete enterprise open source solution for a university that anyone else can take and modify it and bring. I mean, to me, that would be the vision of a university. Not this corporate speak around how are we going to buy this solution that's going to... It's like, no, like investing in people that do amazing stuff and shift the way we understand how this stuff can be used.
Well, and as Brian's pointing out in the chat, also investing in sharing. You know, and making and positioning yourself within that community so that we've talked about this lots before in higher education. Certainly, we're all working towards such similar goals, and and when you're working in isolation, there's just this constant loss of opportunity. And in the K-12 level, there's even more a case to be made. Why? I mean, you could say like for us that we're in competition. With our colleagues at other institutions, right? Because we're all fighting for the same students. But at the K-12 level, that dynamic doesn't exist. There's nothing to excuse not sharing at that level.
And I also want to emphasize one of the points of the article was the poverty levels and that sort of thing. People always talk about the Finland being the school that stands above all the others, and the United States ranks in the middle somewhere. The problem with the United States is we've got pockets of Finland all around this country. I mean, there are some great schools that are on par with what Finland is doing, but we also have some Mexicos in this country as well. And for every Finland, there's 3 or 4 of those schools that need the attention. And the emphasis they always talk about is charter schools. Charter schools are an experiment. They're laboratories.
They're a privatization of that process.
Right.
And I think when you talk about, Mexico's, I mean, I would even think about, you wouldn't even have to go to Mexico or some other kind of third world place to say we have our own New Orleans or Detroit.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, America is actually framing its own really deeply rooted poverty-stricken spaces. And those spaces, like, for example, to transition beautifully, because I'm all about the transition, is, Rick Prellinger, who's a hero of mine, did a great documentary talking about Detroit and the idea of, get away from the idea of Detroit and ruins porn. Like, when you think about Detroit, like, you can buy a block for $7,000 or what. That's how kind of decimated the city's become.
Yeah.
But he uses the archival footage to say, look what Detroit was. Recently, Brewster Kahle and the great Prellinger, I'm forgetting his first name, Rick Prellinger, actually got on. And Rick Prellinger had this great expression that I actually want to talk about and see what you guys think about. He talked about the difference between an idea of corporate expression, kind of what we've been talking about with ed tech and technology, versus personal expression. And, I actually really associate deeply as an educational technologist working at a public school with this idea of the stuff we do as a personal expression of who we are and what we believe education is. And it just seems like everywhere we're surrounded by this idea of corporate expression in ed tech and IT.
Yeah.
And I just love the way he framed that, because for me it solidified so many of the things I think is the problem with our field right now.
Yeah. And and with the corporate, there's the competition. And if we can get away from the idea of the competition, and people always talk about the autonomy that local school districts should have, and that's fine. I mean, but if we started to look at local school districts as adding their own piece to the puzzle, that they can add to a greater tapestry, if you will, of what makes this country and what makes this country and other countries, and put all that stuff together and share those ideas. You get something far more richer, I think.
Well, and I want to respond to one thing that Jason said in the chat. He says you can buy IWBs once and then walk away. If you hire someone, there's a longer-term commitment. And I certainly wouldn't debate that that's true from a monetary standpoint, but if you put an IWB in a classroom, there's basically one thing it can do. When you hire a person, like, you have no idea what the potential is there. I mean, to me, it's like...
And if your person could only do one thing, you hired the wrong person.
Yeah, well, right. If it's Jim and all he does is out.
Jesus, and I reinvent DTLT. But this is an idea that Mikhail once said that I really love, and I don't know where we are time-wise, so cut us off.
Yeah.
But this idea of investing in staff, not stuff.
Right.
Right? Investing in people. And you brought it at the beginning, and to me it's just like, it's so much easier to invest in stuff and pretend like you've, but you haven't done anything. That's why all these universities all over the country are investing in, like, building buildings.
Right.
Because they don't want to hire people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this idea that we have an economic crisis, and it's an economic crisis that's purely, I think, driven by greed.
Created by our greed. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and we are sitting here, like, begging to eat. We're eating rice, right? We've established this. We're eating rice here.
It was Chipotle day.
It was Chipotle day.
So
rice wrapped in a burrito, but still rice. No, and I think it gets right back that it's so important that you have a vision and communication from every aspect. Like, I even think, in the K through 12 sector, you've got even the parents of the schools who look at a school and go, oh, well, they have a bunch of IWBs in their rooms. They must be tech savvy. And the CIO says, we're tech savvy because we have a bunch of IWBs in the room. And the teacher go, I hope I get one because I think that'll make my teaching better. And it's just every aspect of it. Everybody's got to be on board with the same vision for it to go forward.
Well, that's the great Tom Woodward post. Like, hey, wake up, jackasses. These vendors are not your friends. Like, they want your money. And, like, this kind of delusion we're living in right now, that somehow having some corporate support, or what Lehman had suggested, that education being the market right now, that's, how do we say that, Martha? I mean, he basically said that it's the #1 market right now.
Well, it's the #1
for-
market in this industry group that tracks the promotional product industry. They're called ad specials, and the idea is that for the first time, education has topped the list. And their theory is this is because schools have, with their budgets getting slashed, are buying promotional product and selling it as a way to generate revenue. So, which, you know, when you think about, like, okay, instead of buying a T-shirt from the school, why don't you give money?
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
why don't we
do you
tax
really need
people?
the T-shirt
Right.
or the water bottle?
It reminds me of this thing. I went on this thing.
But you don't want to pay more taxes. I mean, that's just.
A while ago, I went on this thing, like, when we started seeing, like, you would buy, like, Cheerios or whatever, or, like, you know, Betty Crocker cookies, and on the box top, it was like, box top for education.
Yeah, you had the box top.
Like, cut off the box top and send it in so that you can fund your school. It's like, when are we going to see box top for, like, war?
Yeah.
Like, here's the box top for the
Yeah.
Department of
Yeah.
Defense.
Yeah.
It's like, it's absurd.
And don't get me started about the lottery and paying for education.
I mean,
either.
but
Well, and
It's
also,
just
like,
a
now the
ghettoized
schools with all the
vision.
fundraisers, and
Yeah.
it's like you take this off and you're going to make money for the school from people in the community who are dead set against spending more money on schools.
Right.
but,
It's like-
and then you
I'm not willing to invest in your school. Oh, you're selling cheesecake? Oh, well,
Right,
in that case,
Well,
come on over. Let me
Yeah,
sign
right.
a check.
I mean,
But all of this, when we start seeing that how so much of the money is siphoned out of that community
Yeah.
into these other things, to
Yeah.
go back to that New York
Right.
Daily News
Yeah.
investigative report, it's like, you know, there are deep structural problems that, you know, at the local level,
Yeah.
we're selling, you know, we're basically eating rice
Yeah.
again, while all these other people are getting rich on it,
Yep.
and we're not investing any of that money in the local space. And
like
that's
with all
exactly
of those
what NYSEG was
fundraisers, you
talking
know
about.
what? You know who's getting paid? I mean, those companies that have been invented
Yeah.
That's right.
just to run fundraisers.
Just to make a little bit more money
Right.
off of their own.
you know,
That's
and how
insane.
much they're taking off the top of that cheesecake.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
Well, I think we have to wrap up, but I think we covered
Oh,
quite a bit. The discussion can still happen on dtlttoday.com. Give a little plug out for that. This will be up later today, so yeah.
Are you plugging it like a corporate thing?
I'm
let
gonna
you take
I'm
the money
gonna
off the top.
I'm gonna
It's
push
sponsored
that
by-
damn
Is
thing.
the next DTLT today some sort of vendor relationship?
no,
It
the
is.
next
Fucking-
DTLT today is going to be post Irene,
Oh.
the hurricane
that's right.
edition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
We might be
So-
doing this from outside next time.
Yeah,
so-
there may not be walls.
Is there any vendor that we could pull in that's for like rebuilding houses or, you know, some trees?
Well, we need an
Sponsored.
emergency
We'll be sponsored by
response system.
Home,
is
Home
what we
Depot,
need.
I think, will be
Can you
sponsoring our
also
next
tell
show.
us, Jim, like what would be the price that we would sell DTLT today for?
Oh yeah.
Just in case there
I
are
learned
any.
this. If Brian Lamb is still on, it's like it's not about selling out. It's about selling out for money. That's the problem with Prof Hacker. They sold out for $10 a post.
Okay, but yeah, how
the
much?
idea is
We're
to
getting
sell out
lost.
for big money.
Okay. Well, how much are we selling out for
Yeah,
next week?
just announce it now. So
It
that
better
we know.
be in the hundreds of thousands so that
Hundreds
like
of
we could come
thousands.
to work with Bling.
Home Depot, Lowe's,
Here's
if
my
you're
screen.
watching, now you know
We'll be
that's
sending
what our
what
price
PayPal
tag
DTLT
is.
account.
today costs.
Hundreds of thousands of
Call
dollars.
us. All right. Thanks for watching, y'all.
Bye, folks.
Peace.